We're the Kurtzes. I'm Laren.
I'm Averil.
And we went in 1997 to the Universidad de Monte Morelos University in Mexico, about an hour away from Monterrey in the northeast part of the country, to teach. I went to teach Old Testament in the theological seminary.
I did not go to teach. I just accompanied my husband. But the day after we arrived, I started teaching. 36 hours a week.
So you taught English as a second language?
And I also taught French for a couple of years.
And this was in the secondary school as well as in the Language Institute that you were teaching.
Yeah, and not knowing any Spanish, when I arrived there, 36 hours of teaching plus trying to look after a home and shop and all of that when I didn't know the language was stressful. So I did not have a chance to take any Spanish classes. So my favorite pastime was talking to myself in my broken Spanish as I walked back and forth to teach. I would often come home and say, "How do you say such and such in Spanish?" And Laren would say this, but why do you want to know? I said, well, I was having a conversation with myself and I didn't know how to say it. So that's pretty much that, and going to church were the ways that I learned Spanish. And I only learned it to be able to understand and speak, not fluently because I hadn't taken classes and the verbal system is very difficult. But at least I could hold my own. I could go shopping by myself by the time we left, and I could sit in church and understand the sermon. That was important.
And ultimately she did learn it very well and does speak it very well, in spite of never having had formal classes. But when I was teaching, part of the work was in the classroom, but part of the work was also in supervising the students when they would go out to the various churches in the area, which they did as part of their seminary training. Actually, I say seminary, it was on the undergraduate level. There were some master's classes that started when I was there, and I did teach some of them, but most of the bulk of my teaching was at the undergraduate level. Now in Mexico, the way the educational system works is that they do not have a lot of general classes as they would in the States or possibly in Canada. But they have one area of concentration, and all of the classes that in any way relate either to that subject or to the students, that group of students studying in that area, are done all together. And so it was quite intense in terms of the types of focus on biblical studies and so on that was done. So part of this was an internship that they had with the various churches that they would go out on the weekends. And one area, not very far from Monte Morelos by distance, but it took us a couple of hours in time because of the roads. Monte Morelos is in a very good citrus area. It's for the nation of Mexico. It's probably the top citrus growing area. Well, not very far from there, a little bit south and somewhat west of there, I believe it is, you go up into the mountains into an area called Galeana, and you would go through several different climatic areas and consequently vegetational areas until you were up in the fir trees and the evergreens. But back some very, very narrow dirt roads into extremely primitive conditions, to where there were some little Adventist churches there, and we would go and accompany our students. Sometimes we went there and they had gone the night before. Sometimes we took them with us. And after bouncing over these roads and trying
with a drop on one side and a cliff on the other.
We would get there, and I remember how hospitable the people were. They had very, very little. Typically, their food, when they ate, they didn't, the one house that we ate at, we simply ate with tortillas. They didn't provide any silverware or anything like that. but they were so gracious and so willing to share what they had with
And
us.
so happy to do it.
And so appreciative
Yeah.
of the fact that we had come,
Yeah.
and so on. They were just very, very lovely people.
And most of the congregations were women, very few men in the congregation.
Particularly in those areas.
In
because
those areas.
many of the men had
Yeah.
gone off to try to work somewhere else, either in the city or had managed to come to the States.
Or they just didn't attend church. Because if we went home, they were there. They just, the women were the ones who were the elders and just led out in church. So, very devout people. Yeah. So, but I appreciate the time that I spent in Mexico, not just for another place to visit, but a lot of the students, both Laren's and mine, have come to the States to study at Andrews, and we have reconnected again with them. And those are lifelong relationships. And besides that, the knowledge of Spanish has given me a second job, because now I do translation and editing for the Inter-American Division for the Publishing Association. So that's a very good thing.
There is, in terms of family, one other story that I possibly could tell you. When we were teaching at Broadview, before we went to...
When you were teaching.
Before we went to Africa, obviously. And before we got married,
Yes.
The Spanish teacher there was wanting to study optometry. And so they were looking for a Spanish teacher and didn't have anyone. Well, I knew French, and I said, since they're both Romance languages, I can probably pick it up enough to teach elementary Spanish. So on our honeymoon, Averil and I went down to Guadalajara. And when we got there, which was on a Friday, we found a place to camp or stay. It was a camp.
A hotel. We stayed in a hotel that night.
And we went to church the next morning and asked whether there was anybody that could take us in. And this one lady said yes, that she could make arrangements in her house to be able to have room for us, and it was probably of help to them because they were getting a little bit of rent from it as well. And so we went there and spent the 6 weeks, lovely, lovely family. And then, as it turns out, when we went to Monte Morelos, her grandsons, yes. One of the girls who was at the house had gotten married, had a family, and her son, so this lady's grandson, came, 2 of her sons, as my students at Monte Morelos. And then when we came here, both of them came up here. And we've had a chance to connect with the family, so that's over 3 generations.
And one of them is working for Andrews University right now.
Currently, yes.
So.
It's a small Adventist world.
Yeah.
No kidding.